October 5th, 1944, 23:40 hours. Just east of Germany, Germany, the Hürtgen Forest. The rain doesn't stop. It's a cold, persistent drizzle that soaks through the wool of Private First Class Martin Adler's M1943 field jacket, chilling him to the bone. He's 19, a replacement for a man whose name no one seems to remember, assigned to the 2nd Platoon K Company, 112th Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. 28th Infantry Division. He clutches his M1 Garand, the woodstock slick with moisture, and tries to ignore the tremor in his hands. It's not just the cold, it's the quiet, an unnatural heavy silence that has descended upon this ancient German forest. The trees are the first thing you notice. They are not like the forests back home in Pennsylvania. These are towering firs, packed so densely they form a solid dark green canopy that blots out the sky, even during the day. Now at night it is an absolute suffocating blackness. The forest floor is a tangled mess of fallen logs, thick undergrowth, and deep muddy ravines, all concealed by a perpetual twilight. You can't see 10 feet in front of you. Adler's world has shrunk to the back of the helmet of the man in front of him, a faint silhouette against an even fainter darkness. In his breast pocket, wrapped in oilcloth, is a letter from his mother. He can feel its crisp edges against his ribs. She wrote about the apple harvest, about his younger sister's new dress, about praying for him every night. Mundane details from a world that feels a million miles away. A world of sunshine, warm beds, and safety. Here, there is only mud, cold, and the gnawing certainty that the silence is a lie. The enemy is here, somewhere in the blackness, watching, waiting. The strategic objective, as the lieutenants explained it with maps and grease pencils, seemed simple enough on paper. Push through the forest, seize the town of Schmidt, and secure the Roer River dams. Deny the Germans the ability to flood the valleys below and halt the Allied advance into the heart of the Reich. A straightforward tactical problem. But here on the ground, the maps are useless. They don't show the hidden minefields, the camouflaged bunkers, the way the forest itself seems to fight back. They don't show the fear. A branch snaps somewhere to his right. Every man in the column freezes, heads turning as one, rifles raised. The sound is unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Was it an animal, or was it one of them? The Alte Hasen, the old hares, the veteran German soldiers who know this forest like the back of their hand. Men who have been fighting on the defensive for years. Adler's heart pounds against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the tomb-like silence. He doesn't know it yet, but he is walking into a battle that will have no grand sweeping maneuvers, no heroic charges. It will be a slow, grinding, anonymous slaughter. A battle of attrition not against an army, but against the forest itself, and the ghosts who haunt it. This is the Hürtgen. The German soldiers call it the Höllenwald, Hell's Forest, and the killing has just begun. The Battle of the Hürtgen Forest was not a single, defined engagement, but a series of brutal, disjointed, and ultimately futile battles fought by the U.S. First Army from September 1944 to February 1945. The strategic logic, conceived at the highest levels of command, was born from a fear of what lay beyond the forest, the Roer River dams. Allied planners, led by General Omar Bradley and General Courtney Hodges, were convinced that if the Germans destroyed the Schwammenauer, Erft and Ruhr dams, they could unleash a catastrophic flood. This man-made tsunami would trap any Allied forces that had crossed the Roer River, cutting them off from supply and reinforcement, and potentially creating a disaster on the scale of Dunkirk. The Hürtgen Forest, a rugged 50-square-mile expanse of unforgiving terrain sitting atop the Siegfried Line, had to be taken to secure those dams. The American force tasked with this monumental challenge was, initially, the U.S. 9th Infantry Division, followed by the 28th Keystone Infantry Division, the 4th Ivy Infantry Division, the 8th Pathfinder Infantry Division, and numerous other attached units. In total, more than 120,000 American troops would be fed into the battle. They were equipped with the standard tools of the American war machine, the reliable M1 Garand rifle, the Browning automatic rifle, BAR, the M1919 Browning machine gun, and the powerful support of American artillery, particularly the devastating 105mm and 155mm howitzers. Sherman tanks from attached armored battalions were meant to provide the decisive punch, but the terrain rendered much of this mighty arsenal ineffective. The forest was a fortress of nature's own design. Its dense coniferous trees, some over 100 feet tall, created a permanent gloom, making aerial observation and air support nearly impossible. The forest floor was a chaotic labyrinth of steep ridges, deep gorges, and narrow, muddy trails that were impassable for vehicles. The few roads that existed were pre-sighted by German artillery, turning them into lethal funnels. Tanks, the linchpin of American combined arms doctrine, were largely confined to these roads, where they became easy prey for German anti-tank teams. Worse still was the weather. A constant, miserable rain turned the ground into a thick, clinging mud that swallowed boots, fouled weapons, and made every movement an exhausting struggle. As autumn bled into one of the coldest winters in European history, the rain turned to sleet and snow. Frostbite and trenchfoot became as great an enemy as the Germans. The dense canopy also had a terrifying effect on artillery. Shells that would normally explode on impact with the ground instead struck the tops of the trees, creating tree bursts. This triggered the shell to detonate in the air, spraying a lethal shower of shrapnel and wooden splinters downwards into the foxholes of the GIs, who thought they were protected. An American soldier was nowhere safe. The American strategy was one of brutal head-on assault. Division after division was ordered to attack, to push forward, to seize objectives measured in hundreds of yards. It was a strategy of attrition, relying on overwhelming numbers and firepower to grind down the defender. But in the Hurtgen, the terrain was the great equalizer. It atomized the battle into countless small, isolated firefights. Squad against machine gun nest. Platoon against a fortified pillbox. The grand operational plans of generals devolved into a primal, close-quarters struggle for survival. The U.S. Army, a force built for rapid mechanized warfare across the open fields of France, had stumbled into a type of warfare for which it was utterly unprepared. It was a battle against the environment itself, an enemy that could not be flanked, bombed, or intimidated. For the individual American GI, the Hurtgen Forest was a descent into a private hell. Many were replacements, or repels, fresh-faced soldiers funneled in to fill the ranks of units that had been decimated. They arrived with minimal combat experience, often straight from training depots in the United States, and were thrown into the line with little to no acclimatization. They were anonymous faces, often not even learning the names of the men in their squad before they or the men next to them became casualties. The daily routine was a monotonous cycle of misery and terror. Mornings began before dawn, shivering in a waterlogged foxhole, trying to choke down cold K-rations. The taste of synthetic coffee and processed meat was a constant, unpleasant reminder of their isolation. The fear was a physical presence, a cold knot in the stomach, a tightness in the chest. It was a fear not just of a sudden violent death from a sniper's bullet or an artillery shell, but of the unknown. The enemy was invisible, hidden in perfectly camouflaged log bunkers and spider holes, often letting entire American patrols pass before opening fire from the rear, creating chaos and panic. Every patrol was a journey into the heart of darkness. A squad would be ordered to move forward, perhaps only 200 yards, to scout a position or clear a pillbox. They moved in single file, stepping carefully, eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of green and brown. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that seemed to move, sent jolts of adrenaline through their bodies. The forest amplified every sound, while simultaneously muffling the telltale signs of an ambush. The snap of a twig could be a deer, or it could be the last sound a man ever heard. The weapon in their hands, the M1 Garand, was a powerful and reliable rifle, but its 8-round en-bloc clip had a notorious flaw in the close confines of the Hurtgen. When the 8th round was fired, the clip was ejected with a loud, distinctive ping, signaling to any nearby German soldier that the American was reloading. In the deadly quiet of the forest, that ping was a death sentence. GIs learned to carry loose clips or have a buddy ready to provide covering fire the instant the sound was heard. Sleep offered no escape. It came in short, fitful bursts, interrupted by the crump of distant mortar fire, the chatter of a machine gun, or the screams of a wounded man. The cold was relentless, seeping into their bones. Men huddled together for warmth in their foxholes, their wet uniforms freezing solid. The psychological toll was immense. Combat fatigue, what we now call PTSD, was rampant. Men became listless, their eyes vacant, the 1,000-yard stare. They ceased to care about hygiene, about food, about anything other than surviving the next minute, the next hour. The forest was a malevolent entity, actively trying to kill them through exposure, exhaustion, and sheer terror, even before the enemy fired a single shot. The letters home, if they were written at all, became shorter, their content censored not by officers, but by the soldier himself, who found it impossible to describe the reality of his existence to a family living in another universe. From the German perspective, the American assault into the Hürtgen forest was both predictable and welcome. Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B and one of Hitler's most capable defensive specialists, recognized the forest for what it was: perfect defensive terrain. He knew the Americans, with their reliance on air power and armor, would be at a massive disadvantage in this environment. The Hürtgen was a natural extension of the Siegfried Line, Germany's fortified western border, and Model intended to use it to bleed the American First Army white. The defenders were a mix of units, but they were far from the broken remnants the Allies had chased across France. Key among them were elements of the 275th and 353rd Infantry Divisions, later reinforced by the veteran 89th and the formidable 116th Panzer Division. These were not elite SS troops, but they were experienced, battle-hardened soldiers of the Wehrmacht. Many were alte Hasen, old hares, men who had survived years of brutal fighting on the Eastern Front. They were masters of camouflage, fieldcraft, and defensive warfare. They understood how to use the terrain to their advantage, turning the forest into a death trap. Their strategy was not to hold a continuous, solid line, which would have been impossible in the dense woods. Instead, they employed a defense in depth, building a network of mutually supporting strongpoints. These positions were brilliantly concealed. They dug log-lined bunkers, reinforced with earth and stone, that were nearly invisible from more than a few feet away. Machine gun nests, typically centered around the devastatingly effective MG-42, known to GIs as Hitler's buzzsaw for its terrifying rate of fire of 1,200 rounds per minute, were sighted to create interlocking fields of fire that covered every trail and clearing. Mortar teams, particularly the effective 81mm Granatwerfer 34, were hidden in deep ravines, able to drop high-explosive rounds with deadly accuracy on American positions that they had pre-registered long before the battle began. The Germans also made extensive use of mines. The wooden-cased shoe mine was particularly insidious. It was designed to maim rather than kill, and was almost impossible to detect with standard American mine detectors. They also laid fields of Teller anti-tank mines on the few roads, and rigged artillery shells with tripwires as makeshift booby traps. The entire forest was seeded with death. German soldiers expected the Americans to attack exactly as they did, head-on, in predictable columns, down the obvious paths of advance. They waited with disciplined patience, holding their fire until the GIs were deep inside their kill zones. They knew that the forest would break up the American attacks, isolating squads and platoons, and allowing them to be destroyed piecemeal. Their morale, while not high in a strategic sense, they knew Germany was losing the war, was high in a tactical one. Here in this forest they were the hunters. They were on home soil, defending the fatherland, and they were inflicting staggering casualties on the seemingly invincible American army. For the German Lanzer, the Hürtgen was a chance to prove that even in retreat, the German soldier was still the most formidable fighting man in the world. The ordeal of the 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone Division, in its attempt to capture the town of Schmidt in early November 1944, serves as a microcosm of the entire Hürtgen campaign. Schmidt sat on a high, bare ridge, dominating the surrounding area and offering a clear path to the Roer dams. To get there, the 28th had to advance along the narrow, treacherous Kahl Trail, a winding path cut into the side of a deep gorge. The assault began on November 2nd. The 112th Infantry Regiment led the attack down the Kahl Trail. The trail was a muddy quagmire, barely wide enough for a single jeep, let alone the Sherman tanks and M10 tank destroyers that were supposed to provide fire support. Almost immediately, the lead tank slid off the trail and became hopelessly bogged down, blocking the entire column. Engineers worked frantically under mortar and machine gun fire to clear the path, but the advance slowed to a crawl. The infantry pushed on alone, their only support being the artillery that often fell uselessly on the treetops. For 3 days, the men of the 112th fought their way through the gorge and up the ridge towards Schmidt. The fighting was savage and intimate. German machine gun nests, hidden in log bunkers, had to be taken out by individual squads crawling forward under withering fire, using grenades and bayonets. Casualties mounted at an alarming rate. Companies were reduced to the size of platoons. Lieutenants and sergeants were killed, and corporals found themselves leading what was left of their units. Yet through sheer grit and determination, a depleted and exhausted remnant of the 112th managed to seize the town of Schmidt on November 4th. They were completely exposed. Isolated on the bare ridge, they had no anti-tank guns, no tanks, and were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. The Call Trail, their only lifeline, was a gauntlet of death under constant German artillery fire. The German counterattack was swift and brutal. Elements of the 89th Infantry Division, and crucially, the 116th Panzer Division, which the American command believed to be miles away, slammed into the beleaguered GIs in Schmidt. Panther and Panzer IV tanks rolled into the town, their 75mm cannons blasting the stone houses where the Americans had taken cover. The GIs fought back with bazookas and sticky bombs, but it was a hopeless fight. The Shermans and tank destroyers were still stuck in the Call Gorge, unable to intervene. Panic set in. The defense collapsed. What followed was a desperate, chaotic retreat back down the Call Trail. Wounded men were left behind. Units disintegrated. Soldiers threw away their equipment and ran for their lives, hunted through the woods by German infantry and tanks. The trail became a scene of carnage, littered with destroyed vehicles, abandoned equipment, and the dead and dying. Medics worked heroically under fire, but they were overwhelmed. By November 8th, it was over. The 28th Division had been shattered. In just over a week of fighting for Schmidt, the division suffered over 6,000 casualties. Killed, wounded, missing, or captured. It was a catastrophic defeat. The division was rendered combat ineffective and had to be pulled from the line to be rebuilt. The keystone had been broken on the anvil of the Hurtgen Forest. The single greatest unexpected outcome of the Hurtgen campaign was the realization that the primary enemy was not the German army, but the terrain and the weather. American military doctrine was founded on the principles of maneuver, overwhelming firepower, and combined arms synergy. The U.S. Army of 1944 was a highly mobile, technologically advanced force designed to fight a war of movement. In the Hurtgen, all of its strengths were nullified. The technological advantage held by the Americans evaporated. Superior air power was useless when pilots couldn't see targets through the dense forest canopy and triple-layered cloud cover. The mighty Sherman tank, so effective in the open country of France, was a clumsy, vulnerable liability on the narrow forest trails. It was a steel coffin waiting for a German Panzerfaust team. Even the vaunted American artillery, the king of battle, had its effectiveness blunted. The tall, thick trees caused shells to detonate prematurely, creating deadly tree bursts that were as dangerous to friend as to foe. This phenomenon was so prevalent and so terrifying that it became one of the defining psychological horrors of the battle for the American soldier. American command failed to adapt. Generals like Courtney Hodges, commander of the First Army, continued to order frontal assaults, throwing division after division into the meat grinder. Convinced that superior numbers would eventually prevail, they viewed the Hurtgen as a tactical problem to be solved with force, failing to grasp that it was an environment that fundamentally broke their way of war. They repeated the same costly mistakes, sending infantry to attack fortified German positions without adequate support, resulting in predictable and horrific casualties. The battle became a throwback to the trench warfare of World War I. Progress was measured in yards, at a cost of thousands of lives. It was a battle of attrition where the defender held every advantage. The Germans, fighting on the defensive, could inflict 3 to 5 casualties for everyone they suffered. This grim arithmetic was a shocking reversal for an American army accustomed to inflicting disproportionate losses on its enemies. The ultimate irony was the strategic objective itself, the Roer dams. While the Americans bled themselves white in the forest, the dams remained securely in German hands. The fear of the Germans flooding the Roer Valley was the entire justification for the campaign. Yet the battle did not bring the Allies any closer to capturing them. The Hurtgen campaign became a self-perpetuating nightmare, a bloody sidetrack that consumed men and material for no discernible strategic gain. The unexpected outcome was not a single battlefield surprise, but a dawning, horrifying realization. The entire campaign was a mistake, a tragic and costly failure of strategy and imagination. The psychological impact of the Hurtgen Forest on the American soldiers who fought there was profound and lasting. It was a battle that systematically dismantled a soldier's morale, his sanity, and his will to fight. The combination of constant danger, physical misery, and the feeling of utter helplessness created a level of psychological trauma that was unmatched in the European theater.